We will now call the March 3rd, 2025 board meeting to order. Ms. Harrison, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Representing Educational District 1, Ms. Katie Howard.
Present.
Representing Educational District 2, Ms. Aretta Bowden. Representing Educational District 3, Dr. Ken Zeff. He's present. Representing Educational District 4 and Board Vice Chair, Ms. Jennifer McDonald.
Present.
Representing Educational District 5 and Board Chair, Ms. Erica Mitchell.
Present.
Representing Educational District 6, Mr. Toten Pace.
Present.
Representing Educational District at Large, Seat 7, Mr. Alfred Chivy Brooks.
Present.
Representing Educational District at Large, Seat 8, Ms. Cynthia Briscoe Brown.
Present.
And representing Educational District at Large, Seat 9, Ms. Jessica Johnson.
Present.
Also present, we have Superintendent Dr. Brian Johnson, as well as Madam General Counsel Nita Gupta. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you, and I would like to acknowledge Aretta Baldwin is present as well. Now we entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the special call meeting on February 3rd and February 10th, 2025.
So moved.
Moved by Board Member Briscoe Brown,
Second.
second by Vice Chair McDonald. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Any opposed? Motion carries. Now I will entertain a motion to approve the February 3rd, 2025 meeting minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Board Member Briscoe Brown,
Second.
second by Board Member Jessica Johnson. All in favor, say aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the agenda for March 3rd, 2025?
Second.
Properly moved by Vice Chair McDonald, second by Board Member Briscoe Brown. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Dr. Johnson, would you please bring the work session items?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Today we have two presentations for you. The first presentation will provide an update on the strategic funding priorities that were outlined in the FY25 budget, which include compensation, literacy, the ERP or the Enterprise Resource Planning, school nutrition, and facilities, and that will be presented by various leaders across those specific functions. And then secondly, we'll have the regular monthly financial update presented by Dr. Lisa Bracken, our CFO. As well as, in addition, while she's presenting that, she'll give a little bit of an update around the budget primer as well as the FY26 budget process. So we'll jump into the first presentation, and I believe Lisa's going to go right after me. I'll begin the presentation, and then I'll hand off to Lisa. Full disclosure and transparency, most of the time we have 3 or 4 or 2 or 3 presentations that come before you during the work session. I think one of the things that we identified as we were in a senior leadership team meeting is that each of these presentations, several of the presentations that were coming this month, were connected to strategic funding areas and priorities that the board had established in the past, and obviously going forward as well. You can go to the next slide. A few things I do want to update, not to, you can go to the next slide. To take away, you can go to the next slide. To take away from Lisa's work, I think she'll appreciate this, but I do want to lay some context out here as we start down this work. So I know the board's engaged in really important work of mission and vision and goals and guardrails, et cetera. And so I think it's really important to bring back the 20 to 25 strategic priorities. As we look to make decisions in future budgets, it will be based on the strategic priorities and obviously the goals that the board has set. And so I think it's important to not necessarily dust this off, but to always keep the kind of strategic framework top of mind. But I also think it's important, and I'll also include this in my comments for the formal session, to really give a high level on the budget status. And I know that not everybody's at Budget Commission, but I think there's some important highlights that that kind of guide some of the work that's going on. So, Last year, $74 million was used from fund balance to balance the budget, and we know that using the fund balance for recurring items is less than ideal. Since 2015, there's been an enrollment decline of 1,643 students in Atlanta Public Schools. Charter enrollment has increased by 3,522 students. Traditional school enrollment has decreased by 7,490 students, or 17% when you factor in the approximately 2,200 for charter partner schools, for partner schools. Since 2021, overall traditional school enrollment is down 1,375 students, or about 3.6%. Atlanta Public Schools has an adult-to-student ratio of less than 5 students per 1 adult. The next closest is DeKalb at 6.91, and the median of our surrounding districts is 7.1. If we were to bring our staff ratio in alignment with DeKalb, it would mean we would be at 2,306 less staff and more than 2,800 when you look at the median. Our per pupil expenditure ranges from $11,900 to $20,000 to $28,800 due to the wide-ranging enrollment capacities of our campuses. If you look at the average school sizes for our counterparts, they're as follows: DeKalb, 695 students; Clayton, 748 students; Fayette, 798 students; Fulton, 823 students; Cobb, 950 students; Gwinnett, 1,296 students; and Atlanta Public Schools, 569 students. We range from 176 students in our smallest elementary to almost 2,400 students in our largest high schools. And so when you look at where we're starting from a budget standpoint as we get ready to lean into these priorities, since 2021, there has been an increase of over $100 million in district offices. And we were committed and are committed to leaning into the work here at the district office and have begun the challenging work of streamlining that work and streamlining what's happening. And when I say district offices, not just CLL footprint, but across support functions that are outside of schools. There have been more than $7 million in reductions to date, December, January, and February. Today there will be more. We are proposing more. We have to lean into this work, and we're unapologetic about that. We're targeting about a $50+ million reduction to our out-of-school footprint. Again, $100 million of growth since 2021. When you look at where we are, there has the discipline applied is showing some benefit. At this point last year, I believe the number was 57% of the CLL budget was spent. And when you look at the same point today, only about 45% of it is spent. So we're already seeing some of the work of really leaning in and focusing, really making a difference. But there were strategic investments that were made, and we think it important to highlight where they are. Anytime the board invests more than $90 million, the district invests more than $90 million in priority areas, we think it really important to bring updates around each of those areas. So you'll hear an update on school nutrition, ERP, you'll hear an update on facilities, you'll hear an update on our literacy adoption, and what am I missing? Oh, HR. You will hear an update on compensation, which you all just spent a little bit of money on last year. And so that's important. Lisa?
Yeah, absolutely. So we covered most of it. The FY24 to FY25 budget grew by $90 million. While we did see increases in other areas outside of the 4 primary functions that I list here, most of those were offset by reductions in other areas. So basically, the full new $90 million can be quantified in these 4 categories, the bulk of which was compensation. So we did 11% on average raises for teachers, but other employee groups did see high percentage increases in their compensation as well. And that was on top of a cost of living increase and robust stipends for many of our teachers across the district. We implemented the first year of our new ERP, or Enterprise Resource Planning System. That was an $8.7 million new investment on top of the $2.2 million that we're continuing to pay for our existing system as we stand up the new one. That's primarily in contracted services. We budgeted $15.4 million in the general fund as a general fund transfer to support the school nutrition program as we brought that in-house. The bulk of that funding was earmarked for bringing on more than 450 additional employees, all of which have benefits, state health benefit costs, and bringing on board all of the food and supply purchases as part of the school nutrition program. Readers are Leaders, we budgeted $11.8 million for that program. That included 1.0 instructional coach in every elementary school, stipends for all of our teachers and paras as they became, as they completed professional learning courses, and also materials and supplies and central office staff to stand up that program. For FY26, we began this budget process talking about a more than $100 million budget gap. We've made quite a bit of progress in closing that gap, primarily by opting out of House Bill 581, which was in the assumptions for the original revenue. So that did close the gap between 20 and 30 million. However, unforeseen expenditure cost, primarily in state health benefit plans and in higher than anticipated average salaries at our school level, has added back that expenditure and almost completely offset it. So we began this budget process with still around a $100 million budget gap. For FY26, we're continuing to look at how we will continue the investments from last year, including the literacy Tier 1 adoption that you'll hear more about, including textbooks, instructional materials, and the training to support that. Year 2 of, and also the first full year of the implementation of the ERP will be next year. School nutrition, our goal is to try to either reduce or eliminate even the general fund transfer to that program. You'll hear a lot about how that program has been successful in the current year. And then compensation, you'll hear the recommendation for a step increase for employees for FY26. There are still some ongoing opportunities. Dr. Johnson teed these up. We have a lot of details in our Budget Commission materials from last Thursday. In all of these categories, first and foremost, I'll call out the small school supplement, baseline supplement, and dual campus supplements that are direct allocations to our schools. That is $11.5 million for FY26. This has already been built into the school budgets for next year. This does not represent the full cost of having small schools or so many facilities. It does not capture utilities, facility costs, transportation costs, or administrative overhead at the central office. We already talked about the staffing ratios and also some of the central office reductions. I will add that central office has grown by 72% over those last 5 years, but in the current year, we've already reduced 57 positions. We'll bring more this evening. Overall, we're targeting about a 20% reduction of the central office cost. And lastly, programming. There's over $60 million in programming that we have in our schools, including signature programs, Readers are Leaders, which I already mentioned, Turnaround, and our ESSER step-down funds. For FY26, we are still working through some of these allocations. For signature programs, we've released a baseline allocation for all of our schools and held back $3 million in reserves for signature. Readers are Leaders, the one-time compensation piece of that is falling off for next year. Turnaround, we've allocated based on a zero-based budgeting approach at the schools, and the ESSER step-down funds are rolling off for FY26. I will pause with my financial update. Again, most of the details for this were covered last Thursday, but I'll take any questions you have before I hand off to Nicole.
Go ahead, Board Member Howard and Board Member Zapp.
Thank you for the presentation in front of the whole board, which I know is condensed from what we talked about during Budget Commission. I'm glad you all focused on the small school supplement. And again, just reiterating, the 11.5 does not include the building footprint, administrative costs. How are we working to understand those additional costs, and how are we planning, since we have not seen, as we discussed during Budget Commission, that has been a big lever to improve student outcomes? I mean, we have had small schools for quite some time and been investing in it. It's been a choice, or it's a strategy. But this is something that we really need to discuss as a district. How are we starting to shift and look at that even closer.
Yeah, that would be a more comprehensive cost out analysis our teams would need to do. Even in what that could mean, I'm thinking like, as an example, transportation, where cost, you might have savings if you're not delivering students to as many schools, but you might have additional costs if you're going longer distances. So we'd have to do some calculations on that. The administrative overhead, I think you're seeing us scale back this year more based on enrollment. But we could see additional savings in central office allocations that are built out by school sites. So those allocations we could model. A lot of the modeling we will do as a supplement to any facilities master planning process. We'll be running what those allocations would look like. And that's where we could get into the weeds a little bit more on how much we're actually costing the district with keeping, again, not to your point, not just small schools, but just the number of buildings, period, that we have open.
Thank you for that, and knowing that we're in the process of resetting our goals and our guardrails and the strategic planning process, and facilities is a part of that. And of course, East Blast, that's 2027.
Yeah.
And just some things will take more time, but how we dig in deeper around those, and transportation costs is not something I mentioned as well. And I'll just point out from the feedback we're receiving, people want to see more robust programming and more investment in areas which do require some economies of scale. So it's good for us to get this feedback now and have these conversations. Thank you.
One thing I think to note, and I can't pull this exact number. I see Dan Drake, and he may hit this in. He's not hitting this in Philip's presentation, but we have what, 45? What's the number of non-school? Putting you on the spot, but we always talk about schools. We also have other facilities that we're quasi upkeeping. Larry, you may know off the top of your head. You know off the top of your head, Dan? Oh, yeah. 46, that's what I was getting at, 46 or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Breckton. Slide 6 has a lot of bad news on it. And some of it we didn't talk about at the Budget Commission meeting last week. The $20 million, I think it's worth just getting a little bit more detail here. So the $20 million gap on benefits is new. Is this something that's came out of this legislative session?
Yeah, in particular, classified benefit rates are increasing to over $22,000 per year per employee. Those are currently closer to 15,600. So it is a huge increase. The state does have a share of the certified employee state health benefit piece. So we do get some of the certified employee increase back through QBE and T&E, training and experience from the state. They don't cover any of our classified workers. So all of our new school nutrition workers, bus drivers, everybody who works in this building for the most part, we will be paying the full cost of that increase out of local funds. And we've seen an increase in state health benefit over the last few years, and tend to have a lot of pushback from school districts when it comes up so close to the budget process. And a couple of years ago, they did come back off of that and ended up doing a mid-year increase. So TBD if we actually end up landing with this full amount in this first year. But right now, we've built into the budget, assuming we'll pick up the full increase of the state health benefit plan.
And then I look at the central office number, and we're talking about these substantial decreases, but it looks like it's about a 6% increase.
So this is the multi-year as we built it at the end of FY 2025. So this is not our FY 26 budget recommendation to date. What you'll see at the March Budget Commission is the real FY 26. This multi-year is all our projections from last year.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. And then just the last piece was around this $10 million underestimate for retention. So if I'm reading this right, this means that our mix of employee or a mix of teachers are higher on the salary schedule than we originally budgeted. Am I characterizing that correctly?
Yeah, not necessarily teachers. It was any school base. So we build the school budgets using an average salary, and it's the average salary of the employees in the current year as of like November. And so who we then ended up hiring and filling our schools with in August made more money than the average of the previous year. And so it's a good problem to have. We gave a lot of good raises, and we recruited a lot of teachers that either had more experience or higher degrees, and that did drive our average salary up. But you'll see in my presentation later today, we're tracking ahead of pace and spend in those school-based categories primarily for that reason.
All right, thank you.
I think Nicole will go through, you'll see some data where when you look at our average teacher with 3 years or more, it moved from 61% to 81%. Now, the question is, we know we got to, right, so the second part of the question is the outcomes. It bodes well on paper to think that we are now, the district is now poised to be able to recruit really talented folks from other districts. So.
Are there any questions? Any other questions? Hearing none, we can move forward. Thank you.
And Dr. Nicole.
All right, good afternoon, board members, and especially those that are joining us online as well as here in the audience today, and those who tuned into the Budget Commission meeting last Thursday, which was centered on compensation. But before we dive deep into our compensation proposal for this year, at the Budget Commission meeting, we wanted to focus on teacher data. And this is a data point that Dr. Johnson was just referring to. Our retention rate is returning to our pre-pandemic level. So our retention rate for last school year was 80.8%. It went up 6.6 percentage points, which is a huge feat. And it's a nod to the work that's going on at the school level, creating welcoming and nurturing environments, as well as our teachers feeling as though this is a place where they can grow and learn. But there is more work to do. So as it relates to our teacher hiring metrics, we started the school year off with 0 teacher vacancies. And as we have been inching towards this for the past 10 years, we've started the school year with less than 5 teacher vacancies. This was the first time that APS reached this milestone. So that is a nod at the work that we've done related to compensation as well as other factors at the school level. In addition to that, our average days to fill vacancies decreased from 24 to 18 days. This past January, we implemented our teacher talent pulse survey, in which we tried to survey our teachers to get student voice as we shape our strategies. We had an impressive 93% response rate to this survey. And these are the big gain areas that our teachers consider to be high thriving areas for APS. One, they feel as though teacher orientation got them off to a great start that went up by 6.9 percentage points from the previous year. They also focus on increase in the area of school retention, school-based retention, which is important, that they plan to stay at their school for 3 or more years, and that increased by 6.4%. Teachers also felt as though that we are hiring excellent teachers at their school. That went up by 4.5%, and they feel connected to the APS mission. So where do we need to focus? For the 3rd year in a row, our area of focus centers around adequate planning time. So you'll see as Dr. Butler comes up to talk about teaching and learning, how we're focusing on strategic master scheduling and planning to ensure that they have adequate planning time to deliver excellent instruction. And then there's also a need for us to focus on opportunities for them to grow. Okay. So as it relates to teacher salaries, you can see that last year we were at the 50th percentile and now we're at the 100th percentile, but not far ahead. Our teacher salary, which is our most common area at the master's degree level, has a starting rate of $68,000, and the next highest is Cobb County at $65,000. This slide just shows our comparisons with salary stipends. And we instituted stipends during the pandemic era in order to make sure that APS was competitive. Now that we have stipends as well as base salaries at the appropriate level, you'll see a recommendation for us to back off of the stipends and ensure that our money is focused on base salary. It shows that, our data shows that that is a more highly effective strategy than having stipends as well as base pay. For stipends, teachers do not get credit for their pension, so having it included in their base pay is more effective. Our recommendations for FY '26 includes providing a step increase for all APS staff to the tune of $8.8 million, continuing to invest in hiring incentives to the tune of $2.2 million, adjusting our salary schedules for non-teaching positions in the area of bus drivers, nurses, and paraprofessionals to the tune of $1.5 million, and to discontinue our retention stipend, which will bring back to our budget $9 million to reinvest in this year's compensation strategy, with a total investment of $3.5 million. I'm now happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions for Ms. Lawson?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I think it's important to note, I just always like to put the truth out there.
Yes.
So we saw a 6% increase the district saw a 6% increase in retention this year. It's probably safe to say that 11%
Help with that, yes.
pay increase is helpful. Any feeling around the sustainability of said, numbers, right? Because I would anticipate, I'm just trying to think ahead a little bit. So if we come back and look at the numbers, what's our target? Where do we think we will be as we head into the next year? Obviously, we want to be there or better. But I don't want us to miss that 11% can make people reconsider.
It's attractive. So the proposal for this year would be to keep that range as is, but teachers will move up a step on that current range. So it's really just maintaining the structure that we currently have, but that will cost us $8.8 million. Also, to Lisa's point, when we have higher retention, right, that gets to a more expensive teacher. And so as teachers stay and we hire more experienced teachers, our average cost will go up in our budget. Not necessarily a bad thing, but there is a cost to it.
Board Member Brooks?
Yes. Thank you so much for laying all of this out. I am curious if we have an understanding about the tenure of our teachers at our specific schools, and if there is an overlay for outcomes against the tenure of our teachers at the schools, and given what we know about the relationship between tenure and outcome, are we looking to incentivize longer tenured educators to go to some of our schools that really need their experience the most?
Yeah. So we do have a dashboard that we have coined, the Teacher Educator Talent Management Dashboard, that principals have access to, as well as cluster superintendents and HR, where they can screen down and see, in comparison to our counterparts, where they are as it relates to teacher experience in their building, and they use that as a way to attract. So our principals are still able to offer hiring stipends at their school level in their budget. So they use that data to either hire teachers in specific areas and incentivize them to come. So our principals still have power, and they utilize data through that dashboard to make those decisions.
Thank you. Also, one of the things that, as we look at our budget or projections for a lot of things, I always keep in mind to myself that our projections are based upon how inefficient our district is actually running currently, and not based upon where we should be in a year from now, 2 years from now, by doing some of the tough work that we're going to do. So I kind of warn us sometimes, or encourage us not to be overreactive about some of this stuff when we look at the 2-year out, 3-year out projections, because they're not based upon where we should be. I digress. Thank you.
Board Member Johnson? I'm sorry, I thought that was your hand. I see a little peep, I just go ahead and, sorry. Anyone else has any questions? Board Member Dr. Zeff?
Just to reiterate on this hiring incentive, this something came up with the Budget Commission. I'm hearing so powerfully, retention is up. I'm hearing that we want to put as much money into base. I would just ask us to, and especially if schools have flexibility, this add of $2 million for additional incentives. And when I'm hearing Dr. Bracken talk about how tight the world is, I would just ask us to take a look at that, especially because I know you have some data around this, but it's hard for me to understand exactly that. I know we have a lot of competition for these dollars, and
Yes.
so I really like that you backed off a lot of these incentives. I would encourage us to think about going all the way and seeing if we can get there. Seeing that retention's up, we want to put dollars in base pay. I just offer that as a reminder.
Noted.
Was there, am I mistaken, but was there like a $2 million for recruitment or
Yes.
something that was in there?
Yes.
Can you help me make sense of that one, right? So, I'm trying to understand why we need $2 million for recruitment when we have 0 vacancies and extremely high retention.
Because teachers still leave every year. And so the $2 million includes being able to hire for H-1B visa teachers. So that's one component of it, which is critically important for certain roles in the district, dual language immersion, math, and science areas. So we need to have dollars set aside for that. The second area is centered on our early intent to return survey, and that is helping us shore up forecasting so that we can hire early, right? So the earlier our principals know whether or not someone is returning in the district, it allows them to be able to fill that vacancy sooner, and that also impacts teacher quality. That driver has been in our recruitment package for the past 2 years and has been highly effective. And then the other area is centered on, I have it on here. Oh, hiring incentives, just regular hiring incentives for hard-to-fill areas. So that would be math, science, special education.
Has that increased or decreased from one year to another? Are we asking less this year than last year, or
It's the
is it
same.
flat? Or
It's flat.
okay.
Thank you, Ms. Lawson.
Dr. Butler will come up for literacy. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Providing a brief update of where we are with the literacy adoption. I think I'm going back. Okay, here we are. Just as a reminder, we've kind of been living here for the past year in the literacy legislation. We have 3 House bills that are governing this process. The 2 on the opposite ends, mostly we control in-house, whereas the one in the middle of the council is a 30-member team. That work is kind of handled at the state level. So what we've been doing in regards to House Bill 538 as well as Senate Bill 48 is in the realm of the science of reading training that we've done with our teachers and staff, as well as the dyslexia testing with students and providing support in that space. So getting back to the curriculum adoption, this is the timeline that we have been following this past year. Dr. Johnson established the Literacy Task Force in August. We have engaged with this Literacy Task Force throughout the process, all last semester and all this semester, and that task force will continue to inform our work, but we didn't stop with just engaging the Literacy Task Force. We also have had focus groups at all levels. We've met with vendors based on what the state identified as top vendors for K-5 in alignment with the science of reading. and match that with the 612 needs, so that we had a comprehensive list. And on the following slides, you will see what that short list end up becoming, which led us to several engagements with the vendors, with the curricula, and some final decisions that I'm prepared to discuss today. So this is that short list for K-5, which was modified from the state list, and based on the focus group feedback that we received, this is the short list of 5 that we have for K-5 and 4 for 612. The past 2 months, we dug in with the coaches because that was our most active audience, with being able to work with them every month at our coaching academies. So the coaches participated in vendor presentations. It's important to note that this is the only group of stakeholders that received vendor presentations, because that's going to inform some of the other things that I tell you about what showed up in the data. So this audience was able to ask questions of the vendors as they presented the information, also see the materials. All of the other stakeholder groups either participated in an in-person vendor fair where the vendor was not present, but the materials were present, and they submitted their rating using our online survey that we then took a look at the data and analyzed it to come up with our selections. And here's our participation. So as you can see, across K-12, a little less than 500 surveys submitted. That does not translate into people who actually reviewed it. It's really just about, because we did have a lot of foot traffic at the vendor fair on the teacher professional development day, but it didn't always translate into completed surveys with ratings. So when you really look at the numbers, a good majority of the coaches participated because they were the ones that saw the surveys, but small numbers when you think about the number of teachers that we have in the district. Nevertheless, looked at the data to see where were we. 612 was very obvious. Even though the participation was low in terms of 186 survey responses, all stakeholder groups selected HMH into reading. However, when we looked at the data that we received from K-5, it varied depending on the stakeholder group of the top choice. And so we came up with 2 top choices, which was benchmark and HMH into reading based on the results. So where are we going with this? For 612, we're moving forward with a 3-year adoption paid in 2 installments for the HMH into reading. With K-5, we have a little bit more work to do. So over the next couple of weeks, principals we've already ordered for more sample materials to go to all K-5 schools of the 2 top vendors so that they can dig in more deeply to select which curriculum they want to pilot in every class all of next year, so that way they can deeply engage with the work before settling into a multi-year contract for the remainder of a 3-year adoption. And that's it. With that, I'll take questions.
Board Member Johnson, Board Member Briscoe Brown, Board Member Brooks, Board Member Talton Pace.
Thank you. Thank you so much for updating us on where we are with our literacy work. Really am curious with the people who participated in the survey. Do you have information on what that looked like across clusters? And was it district-wide, really strong representation across the entire district, or was it in kind of pockets?
That's what that is actually what led to the decision of pilot for K-5. Because the way that we collected the data, it wasn't separated by cluster. So with such small numbers, it was you couldn't determine if it was coming from one area or several areas. So the instructional coach data is more reliable in that we engage with all of those who participated, whereas with the vendor fair, it's very hard to determine if it was just concentrated in a particular area and if some areas got missed. So that's why we're extending the additional 2 weeks and sending it back to the building level, so that we are not making the decision, the schools are making the decision, and we're making sure that it's not an accessibility issue, so we're providing them with the resources and materials at their school. We've opened up, and we've already contacted the 2 top vendors, so we'll have virtual sessions so that they can dig in and ask more questions over the next 2 weeks of those vendors before giving us their final selection for the 1-year pilot.
Thank you. And my second question, on slide 30, it says there's a one-time cost. Do we have an idea of what that number might be?
So yes, the short answer is yes. So it's approximately $5 million when you add both vendors together. We'll know exactly which slice of the pie each vendor will get after the 14th.
Okay, so that's the $5 million at the top. There isn't an additional one-time cost above that $5 million investment?
So at the end of the end of this first year, in the spring semester, we will go into a multi-year contract so that way we can gain the benefit of a cost savings. So then there will be additional funding for the additional years that we will add.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, I wanted to ask a couple of questions about the participation as well. I note that we only had 3, it looks like we had 3 K-5 principals and 3 6 through 12 principals, which is a tiny, tiny fraction of the number of principals we have. And likewise, really, with these numbers across the board, and echoing Board Member Johnson's question about how these were spread throughout clusters, understanding that there may be some variation from one cluster to the next as to what staff and parents and our employees feel would work the best. And so just to ask, I know we're doing the pilot at K-5, but at 6-12, are we confident that this decision is the best for every cluster, every school, every location in the district?
As confident as we can be. So I'll just to give more context, every stakeholder group, HMH was their top choice. And then when you look in the ed reports, and just myself, having been in this work for several years, I called other districts. And overwhelmingly, almost all of those districts, including locally, had adopted HMH for 6-12. So that seemed to be the preferred choice based on ed reports, based on just contacting people in terms of what they're using across 6-12. Also in those just anecdotal engagements, it was also nothing in those conversations gave me a sure up answer about K-5. So, yeah.
I would ask that when we collect data on these 2 vendors, that we be sure to drill down into where those responses are coming from, as well as what the responses are, so that we can be confident that we're meeting the needs of every school and every student.
And that's the benefit of the 1-year pilot, is that throughout the full year, we'll be engaging with schools. Schools will have opportunity to work within their cluster or throughout the district, even with the curriculum that they didn't select. So really being strategic about and intentional about making sure that everyone has an opportunity to dig deep into what we're selecting, to do just that, make sure that we are committed, because it is a big investment. And so we need this 1 year to do the due diligence of collecting the data and making sure that people are comfortable with the decision moving forward.
So we'll pilot both of those in every school?
No.
Or half and half, and then at the end of a year, half of them will have to switch to yet another curriculum?
No. So no, and I'm happy you asked that question, because that was confusing for some. So for clarity, they will select the choice of what they will pilot for the 1 year, but we don't want them to lock in. And so we want to be intentional about them deeply engaging with the one that they selected, as well as having opportunities that we can establish for them to be able to explore the other one if they start to experience some dissatisfaction with their selection. But what we are not doing is after they have become comfortable with the curriculum, taking it away. So it will look like, unless for whatever reason people hate one of them, it will look like 2 selections.
So that will be on a going forward basis? So
Yes.
I'm a principal at an elementary school, and I choose benchmark, and next principal over chooses HMH. At the end of the year, what we are not going to do, and correct me if I'm wrong, is decide that we're going to go with HMH, and I, as a benchmark principal, then have to switch again. We're pretty much going forward with both of them?
Correct.
Okay, so
Unless-
this is
unless-
not an
Unless-
opportunity to choose.
Unless
let's
something,
always quantify.
yeah.
Unless, as they go through the course of the year, there's this natural migration to a particular resource, right? I won't say I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen. I think this is about as the best of both worlds as you can get to give choice to schools and for them to actually have some time to spend some time and actually use it. And so, yeah, if those 2 become the one, correct me if I'm wrong, if those 2 stay 2, they stay 2. If they go through the course of the year and I'm a HMH school and my friend that teaches 3rd grade, my colleague that teaches 3rd grade in another school is a benchmark school, and we continue to have conversations at school A about what school B is using, and we're seeing better results because we're also going to have some data that we can point to as well. Then those conversations will happen as well, right? So that's the thought is to give choice, but also there's this reality that sometimes schools decide to move together, and we won't stop that either. Just to be really clear.
Will the cost double if we continue with both vendors?
No.
Okay.
No, but just to really just affirm what superintendent is speaking to, the goal of the pilot is to give choice. And to also leave room for that natural dissatisfaction and finding solutions. And if there isn't a solution, if there isn't a path forward based on the data we collect with one of the vendors, then it's one. But the goal is to just give space for both. And we're comfortable with living and existing with both on a multi-year contract if that's the desire of the schools.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Question on data. Do we have data points on literacy rate outcomes for either vendor? I'm curious, is that known?
It is. It's the thing about it is the vendors can kind of position it how they want to, right? So in our vendor videos and presentations, we can find connections in growth to each of the products. But when I make my calls and I'm calling chiefs or executive directors and principals, they're giving me anecdotal information around the things that they did, like the decisions that they made to deal with some of the things. Like it wasn't just in its purest form. So both have research and data to support their ability to get us student growth. But when you talk to the people who are doing the work, the practitioners, they speak about the things that they did outside of the curriculum, not necessarily supplementing it, but here's what we had to do with the pacing. Here are the extra materials that we had to tweak, or in this school, depending on the teacher capacity, or if it's a novice teacher or a veteran teacher, these are the extra things. So it's just not perfect, but both of them are sound, and the ED reports support that these 2 or 3 are connected to the science of reading and aligned to our Georgia English language arts standards.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I think that has been one of the things we wanted to be very intentional about, is making sure that our ELA curricula is aligned with the science of reading and moving away from some particular practices that were not helpful for learning how to read. And just in doing some of my own research and looking at these things and talking with some of the instructional coaches in the district, you know, I had some concerns with one of the particular curriculum, which uses photos or images for word retention, which kind of goes back into practices we didn't want to do. And then I think when we look at the data between school districts who have procured one curricula or the other, there's actually a marked difference between the literacy rates between like almost 10 points, literacy rate difference between one curriculum and the other. My other concern is if we don't decide on a particular, and I kind of share with what I believe Board Member Briscoe Brown is trying to allude to, is that if we don't adopt a particular curriculum, if I'm a teacher and I go from one school to another, or if I'm a student that moves from one neighborhood in the city to another, I might be experiencing completely different curriculum. And I think right now we're at a place where people would actually appreciate a continuum of curriculum across the district. And I've even heard that from administrators throughout the district as well. That's kind of like, I wish y'all would just pick one instead of doing it this way. So, you know, I just kind of lay that out there.
And I think that feedback is really good. So we've got schools in the house too, and so we can get to one, but we'll get to one through schools and through working with principals. And I think, you know, the goal here is to give them something tangible to touch and to feel, and then we can work towards coalescing around a specific resource. What we don't want to do, and I've been a part of this on the other end because I've implemented several, I won't say many, I'll use many, of these at scale. What we don't want to do, there's a change management component of this that I think is really important, and trusting our teachers and leaders as professionals and a level of deference to their expertise as they go through training. They've gone through Cox Camp in Science of Reading. They've kind of, you know, they've been immersed in some of that. They've got some good Tier 2 and Tier 3 with Haggerty and Flyleaf. They've got some, you know, some resource from that standpoint. Now I think we need to give them a chance to feel, see, touch. And I've been a part of seeing the mistake on the other end where we go, let me just say like this. I won't even say what I've been a part of. I'll say what I've observed in APS. Mm-hmm. In our warehouse, in Atlanta Public Schools warehouse, there are millions of dollars in boxed up curriculum that was not implemented, I'm just going to be frank, from my perspective, very well. The change management around getting people to buy in and feel a part of is as important as getting, you know what I mean, the thing right. So I think the other piece that I'll be really candid about, just, you know, in full disclosure, a part of the timeline, if you go back to the timeline, we ramped this timeline a smidge because we heard, as I came in August, one of the things I heard when going out to schools was not having access to the resources prior to school starting. And so we ramped up a little bit to get these resources in teachers' hands as much as we possibly can, so that even prior to them leaving, Dr. Butler and team can start training with schools and even looking at the May train, you know, really trying to think about what's to come so people aren't going to the summer cold. So I think your comment is fair around this, but I think also, you know, we are sensitive to the fact that deferring to expertise is really important. And I think there is a whole nother layer that we can get at by allowing our schools to have an opportunity to kind of help guide us. And look, I've been a part of this with cluster superintendents and folks in teaching and learning. Like, we might be surprised that they might all migrate to a single resource. I'm not saying they will, but I'm just saying they may all migrate to a single resource anyways. And it's so much better when that's done organically when you've got a situation like this. Now, I think for the one that's 10 points or more, you said, which one? Was that benchmark or?
I didn't want to get accused of advocating for one vendor or another, so I didn't say any names.
Is that illegal, Nina? Tell me.
I don't even know.
Okay. Theoretically.
Right.
Yes.
Theoretically, Benchmark probably had better outcomes in the districts that it has been implemented, and theoretically, what's the name? HMH utilizes like photo and word memory as a part of its practice, and that's something that's being obviously dissuaded because that's not how you learn how to read. So, yeah.
I don't know if I should theoretically speak to those things.
I think theoretically, if there were two resources, I think you can theoretically.
Because I'm kind of skirting around it too, given that we
are
haven't made
making
a
database decisions, you go right ahead.
Okay. So theoretically, again, like I was very impressed by the data with those numbers too, and did make calls, which is what I was speaking to in one of the other answers around, okay, this is really impressive. What did you do? How did you get there? And that's what I found out, that those districts maybe didn't agree with some of that, and that they spoke to the level of work that, can I say that? I don't know, that went into implementation on both sides, right? So it's really a matter of preference because they're very, very different. It sounds like you've done your research. The two are very, very different. So if some people really, really loved one and didn't love the other, those are two different types of educators. And then also just going back to these numbers, our hope when we started this process was to get to one. The administration wanted one. We wanted to be able to support one, but we don't have the participation from the school level right now, which is why we're extending it to really get deep engagement, to either fall in love or in dislike with one or the other, or love both, so that way we're not sitting with millions in a warehouse this time next year.
And in defense of that, regardless of what we adopt, some of the accountability is on us to ensure that, right, folks are actually implementing whatever's there. But there is in fact, I believe for one of the resources, there is material that's boxed in the warehouse. Well, I don't know. Theoretically, there could be, and so I think it's one of those really, it's a real opportunity around this conversation.
Does that go into a savings then? If y'all already got the materials, does
Yes.
that cut the cost?
That was part of the negotiation, yes.
Oh, heard on that. All right.
Board Member Pace.
Thank you so much, Dr. Butler, for your presentation. Knowing that a lot of our work going forward, is zeroing in on subgroups, across the district, I was curious as I saw the title of the benchmark curriculum and it had Adelante in the title. The assumption, without kind of doing some extensive research, is that there might be a component directed toward English language learners embedded within this curriculum. And if so, is that an automatic in what we purchase, or is that something we have to opt into? And then kind of along with that, for the HMH, is there a similar component within that curriculum?
Yes, for both.
Yes, for both. Okay.
Yes, for both. Both have biliteracy and Spanish translation. It is a part of the adoption. So as our DLI schools or schools with English language learners make their selections, that will be included in what we order.
Excellent. And then just one quick follow-up to that, kind of building on Shivi's comment earlier, do we know or have any idea of how successful or otherwise that curriculum has been for our English language learners, DLI learners, and how that translates to access scores, specifically for English language learners in terms of proficiency increases, decreases, or even staying the same?
I can look into that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I have a quick question. First of all, thank you for this presentation and in the details. I guess my question is, I like how we are focusing on early literacy, 6 through 12, but want to know a little bit of information. What are we doing about adult literacy with our adult education that we have with one of our campuses?
That's a great question, Chair. I don't know that this impacts that. I think what we can absolutely do, because the focus of this has been like the K-12 piece, But we can absolutely get some feedback around that and bring that to the entire board. Happy to do that, or in a board update, what have you. I've had a chance to go and visit the program and seen the engagement. I will say that the projected participation versus the actual, there's some noise in there. Like in reality, we're not seeing as many adult education participants take advantage of the coursework, and that's a reality. Really by about half of the projected. But I will say, from having a chance to go and interact, there are some delightful people there that are doing really good work, and I will say that I also was encouraged by some of the non-English speaking population that's there trying to refine workforce preparedness skills and be ready to go to work. So I do know good things are happening there, and we're happy to provide an update on that in the future.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I didn't exclude any population that we serve, so I didn't mean to catch you off guard. But as I think about some of our students that may be aged out of high school, that want to come back for additional refinement or just to have the opportunity to, with continuing education, it's always, to me, is like we support the whole community, not just K through 12, like the whole community. We want those people to come back and use us as a resource, as we are, the foundational education institution of the city. Any other questions? Okay.
All right, thank you.
I think next is Femi, and I want to just remind, as you come on up, I just want to remind the numbers around these investments, and I think it's important to elevate. So $53 million last year in compensation, $8.7 million in ERP. So, Femi?
All right. Good afternoon. We're pleased to provide an update on our ERP modernization initiative, a transformative effort to replace our 20-year-old legacy system with a state-of-the-art platform. This modernization effort represents a significant leap forward in our district's operations. By investing in a future-ready ERP system, we enhance efficiency, strengthen security, and equip our teams with the tools they need to support our mission effectively. Why is this all important? Modernizing the ERP system is not just another upgrade. It'll bring about some significant benefits, which include a fully connected system, will enhance workflows across all functions from hiring and teacher retention to payroll processing, budgeting, and financial operations. By reducing manual efforts, our staff can redirect their focus towards district priorities. A new system will offer an intuitive interface, mobile accessibility, and remote access capabilities, improving user experience and accessibility for all staff. Real-time data insights and artificial intelligence tools will empower leadership with trend analysis, forecasting, and strategic planning. Also, strengthened data protection measures will safeguard sensitive information, ensuring robust security protocols and regulatory compliance. We will enhance operational effectiveness by resolving inefficiencies in several business functions, many of which have been highlighted in prior internal audits. Finally, eliminating fragmented bolt-on systems will help us to reduce complexity, lower cost, and streamline departmental processes. This project is estimated to cost about $40 million. We have recently revised these numbers downwards a little bit over the next 5 years. What you're looking at there is a proposal for how we intend to fund the project. Over the next several cycles, this will be funded out of general funds, and then in the last years of the project, it will roll into I was flawed as approved by the voters. While contracting and planning began last year, we formally launched the project in January of 2025. Our phased rollout ensures a smooth transition with minimal disruption. Currently underway is the financial module has a planned launch date of July 2026, along with the budget module. Implementation of the HR and payroll modules will begin sometime this month, with a scheduled release in January of 2027. And finally, the procurement module is set for release in April 2027. One of our biggest challenges will be managing operations out of two different systems, beginning July 2026 through April 2027, when we're operating out of two systems. However, we've assembled a highly skilled team that can help us navigate this transition seamlessly. Finally, our business teams and leadership have been outstandingly engaged and dedicated. Their active participation in workshops and design meetings have been instrumental in shaping the fast start that we have experienced with this project, and we extend our sincere gratitude to them. To further ensure the team's success, we've engaged Gartner to provide independent project oversight and data governance expertise. At this time, I will invite Mr. Steve Kaplan from Gartner to share insights on our data governance framework and also to provide an assessment of the project's progress so far.
Good afternoon. So as Femi said, my name is Steve Kaplan. I'm a senior director at Gartner Consulting, and I'm going to touch on two initiatives that Gartner is involved in at Atlanta Public Schools. And the first is what Femi referred to as the data governance. This project was initiated as a result of some audit findings, particularly concerns around record retention. And so we spent some time interviewing stakeholders across the district to understand their issues with respect to how they gathered and used information. I'm sorry, pressing the wrong button. And what we found was that the issues were actually bigger than just record retention. That in fact, staff across the district were struggling with trying to find the data they needed to do analyses and the data they needed to respond to open records requests. And over the course of the project, we identified 61 use cases, and that's what these two slides show, which are examples of areas where stakeholders in the district were having specific difficulties accessing data or putting data to work or using data for open record requests. Originally, we were asked to help the district with standard operating procedures. We also observed that a number of these use cases, standard operating procedure was not going to solve the problem. So we've color-coded this list, which is just a summary, to show which of the use cases needed a new SOP and which of the use cases needed something else, like improved data governance or some technology changes or changes to business process. In addition, we've taken 10 of these use cases, and I'll just go back to the first page for just a moment. We've taken 10 of these use cases and provided the district with some more detailed analysis, 5 sets of standard operating procedures, and then for the other 5 use cases that are not SOP related, some more specific recommendations around data governance and technology. In addition to this analysis, we've also identified 4 additional recommendations, kind of district-wide things that we think should happen if Atlanta Public Schools is going to do a better job of retaining its data, putting it to work for internal analysis, and accessing it for open record requests. The first is that the organization probably should have a senior executive who's responsible for data. This is often referred to as a chief data officer, but there's a variety of titles that we've seen across different organizations, but somebody who has overall responsibility for data. Data governance, which is a cooperative effort between the district and the technology folks needs to be more mature than what you have today. There are some technology investments that are recommended over time, and something that is actually already happening, which is given some of the data issues around the data that's going to be going into the new ERP system, that looking at that data now and starting to do cleanup is going to be very important to improve the chances of success for the ERP. So these are some of our findings with regard to data governance. With regard to the ERP project, we have just begun our analysis. This dashboard shows the categories that we use at Gartner to analyze project risk, because everything we do is focused on the risk to the project. And risk typically involves a failure to deliver results, budget overrun, and or a schedule over. And so we analyze a variety of dimensions, including governance, financials, how the project is managed. Right now, we're in the middle of what we call our baseline assessment, which is looking at, is the project getting off on the right foot? So for the baseline assessment, we're going to be focusing on project governance and sponsorship, data issues, and the early stages of solution design, which the team is in the middle of right now. In addition to producing a risk dashboard that will look like this, we will also be producing some more detailed, and this is just a sample, by the way, some more detailed analysis for each of the risk areas to give specific recommendations on how the district can mitigate that. I just want to go back for just a second. What we have observed and what our research has reinforced is that many times projects like the Quantum Project, when they encounter difficulties later on during development, during system testing, those difficulties are often the result of seeds that are planted in the early stages of the project. So the baseline assessment we're working on now is focusing on those areas that we expect to have a long-term effect on the likelihood of project success. As I mentioned, governance and sponsorship, data, and is the project teed up correctly to do the right kind of data cleanup for both governance and integration purposes, project management discipline, and finally, is the team spending enough time looking at business processes and not just the issues of how do we configure and install it? So we're focusing on those things now and expect to have a baseline risk assessment completed by the middle of March. So I'll pause here and see if anybody has any questions, either for myself or for Femi.
Questions? Okay. Katie, we'll start with you.
Thank you for the update, which is exactly what we asked for as a board. This is a huge investment, and serving on Budget Commission and Audit. We had a lot of conversation about this. So I guess this is a question for Dr. Johnson around accountability, like slide 41. Sorry. I mean, it's for everyone. Just going back to audit and just the accountability piece and the things we're laying out now. I mean, how are we positioning ourselves to make sure this huge investment is get the complete value of the spend? Because there are a lot of moving parts, and I know you've been through something similar before. So yeah, anything you can share with the team, how we're positioning ourselves to make sure we follow through on the things we're being told we need to do now.
Absolutely. I'm happy to give a high level, then I'll let Femi speak to it. He's dedicated to it. I think one, the board's done a great job. So obviously I came in, kind of the trains running down the track on this. I've been a part of an Oracle implementation at a little bit larger scale, but had to kind of pivot as a byproduct of it, and frankly, hearing about data governance gives me some like PTSD flashbacks to former life, because that's like one of the biggest challenges that exist in their, in their space, right? And so I think that conversation is really important. I don't know that we'll be, I'm telling Gardner this directly, I don't know that we'll be hiring a chief data officer, but the focus around the data, I think, is really important. For us, the way I think the district's tried to approach it and we've tried to support since coming in is, one of the things about these types of implementations, and let me speak very, very, very candidly, and I think it's a risk that I don't know that Gartner has listed on here, but that I want to absolutely call out, okay? When you go through these type of implementations, you have your day-to-day operation that has to operate. And I'm going to use layman's non-technical because I'm not overly technical. But you have your day-to-day operation that has to operate. And then you have, obviously, this implementation that's taking place. And, the person that's in charge of payroll, let me use a very simplistic, still has the day-to-day responsibility in the HCM, which will be when next winter, is that right, 18 months? Or
January 2027.
January 2027. So the person that's responsible for that, has the duty of getting everybody paid on time, but still has that kind of transfer over of understanding the system. So the staffing, I think, that's been kind of thought about, some of the things that I experienced as real challenges and created real tensions, I think are things that have been thought about. So obviously, Gartner's here to keep us on track and to call out the risk that are there, which frankly is much better than me, because they're an independent party that's going to tell us, like it is. Femi, anything? What am I missing that is there?
Well, I mean, specific to the example you gave, we are working with the business leaders to mitigate exactly what you just talked about, so that we ensure that we have that coverage. Yeah, we're working through it. That's the short answer. But we're going to look through all of the recommendations as made, and then make a determination when and how we will implement those.
Thank you. And really helps to get these updates. And of course, I also am looking closely at slide 34. And Dr. Zeff may bring up costs, but then I will, real quickly, and Cynthia follow. Just, we have a plan here in place. So any updates around that in terms of, we're looking right now at 3.7 million in FY28 to be funded by the East Blast. So just thinking long-term, this is a long-term spend.
It is, and the reason why I said earlier in my presentation that we've revised this downwards is because our strategy for the backfill is changing a little bit. Initially, we were going to fully backfill positions in HR and finance for the most part, but we realized that it's difficult to bring in a backfill to fill some of these roles. So we're going to get a little creative working with the leaders on that, and that's why we feel comfortable revising that down a little bit. And then for this year, we know we're trending a little bit downwards. We're not going to spend all of the $8.7 million this year, which will kind of bleed into next year.
Thank you. Trending downwards. Good.
Okay, Dr. Zeff?
Thank you for this, Mr. Kaplan, and thanks, Femi. I've been a part of a project similar with smaller scope and wasn't particularly successful. And in part because these things, especially replacing these intense legacy systems, is a lot going on. And when I see the 61 use cases, and this transcends every part of the operation, or all the key. You're talking about special ed, you're talking about payroll, you're talking about communications, everything. I guess I just have heartburn, and so I want somebody to share that with me, and I think that's you, Mr. Kaplan. And so I guess what I would ask is, I don't know how often you're coming back to us. Hopefully quarterly, or
about every 3 to 4 months.
Perfect. And I guess if there's as you keep, as you I just look at all the boxes on all the data governance issues that need to get addressed. And so does the plan, I guess, is it reasonable to expect when we're done that these data governance issues are going to be resolved?
So obviously that work is going to have to happen over time. As part of our work, as I mentioned, we identified 10 of these, which were high priority, and we made detailed recommendations so the district can get started on those 10. Now, a lot of these, and this is all the ones that are indicated with a red dot, these are ones that are going to be addressed or heavily impacted by the new ERP system. So as finance goes live, as HR goes live, you know, a lot of these things kind of in those several fell swoops will be cleaned. The district will need to figure out a schedule for dealing with some of these others on a department by department.
All right, well, I appreciate that, and just know bad news doesn't age well. And so as soon as there's issues, please bring them and let us know what we need to do to support the work.
Absolutely. As Femi mentioned, probably we expect to be presenting to you folks periodically, but we're in touch with the projects on more of a day.
And I'm the bad news chief on ERP. So I've said this to the group when they came in to visit. When I spent time at Transportation Logistics and we were doing Oracle implementation, it felt like deja vu because I arrived right as they made the decision. And what concerns me about where we are is that we felt like we were I feel like we were in the same place in a different scale from the private sector. So we had earnings challenges and we were making steep cuts across the enterprise, and we were trying to implement ERP all at the same time. And I went to the CFO and just had a very direct conversation that we needed to pause after spending some time and going through. And we had invested a lot more than we have here, but that's just where we were in that moment in time. And so this doesn't feel like that yet, but you know.
Cynthia?
Yeah, when we discussed this and approved it as part of the last budget, I remember distinctly being told that we were required to do this. I don't see any reference to that anywhere in this presentation. Is that no longer the case?
Part of why we set out to accomplish this is because the current system that we're on right now, the Lawson system, we have until, I want to say it's the end of 2026 or sometime in 2027 to upgrade that platform because it is heavily customized. So yes, in some ways, we're being forced off that platform. That is correct.
And when we discussed it before, I asked for a date. In my legal world, we call that a date certain, on which that would happen, and we would be required to update it. And y'all weren't able to give us a date then. Do you have one now?
I will go and get it.
Okay. Because as we discussed then, our last big pension repayment, our pension liability payment, happens in 27. And so you'll remember we had this conversation,
Yes.
and I asked whether it was possible to backload some of this expense until after that last pension payment was paid, because they go like this, and I think the final one, and Dr. Bracken, correct me if I'm wrong, is something in the like high $70 million. And after that, we go way down for a couple, it goes up a hill and then it drops off a cliff. And so if we could push this past then, any portion of it, then we would have a lot more funds, and we would not be taking money out of fund balance like we are. This is going to significantly reduce our remaining fund balance. And also, I do note that the SPLOST numbers on the bar chart on slide 34 are different from the ones detailed below. And I assume the difference on that will be made up either out of fund balance or the general fund. The difference between 2.68 million and 3.7 million, I assume will get made up. I mean, we just assuming it's going to be made up somewhere, or it's not shown here. So my question is, do we now have a date certain? What is that date? Will we be far enough along in this process that we can potentially push some of this expense to FY28 when our budget issues and specifically our fund balance issues give us some breathing room?
Okay, we'll work on getting you that date, as
Okay.
promised. But this plan takes into consideration all of that. I do want to say, though, that when you extend the date on the project, it freezes a lot of resources. It actually costs you a little bit more, depending on how you spread the scope of the project and the implementation. So it's not necessarily a cost savings, particularly because it's not like we can have the project resources leave and come back sometime in the future. So there's a balance in that approach. But I hear it.
All right, thank you.
I would just echo what he's sharing on the other side, just from previous experience. We didn't pause it. I use the word pause. We stopped it, and so the people went with the, and so because to his point, like it's tough to bring it all back. So,
Ivy?
Thank you. Yeah, this project definitely gave me a lot of sticker shock when it was first brought up. And I also recall asking at that time whether or not this was something that we could push back in lieu of the fact that we were having to deal with a dominating conversation about a $100 million deficit, a conversation about potential school consolidations and inefficiencies in our district. Yet we are also at the same time having a conversation about upgrading the ERP, which we understood would be, or we were led to understand as a savings over time. I'm struggling with this one right now. I'm wondering, is there, if it is something to be considered about what our direction is. I mean, as I'm looking at the chart, it looks like we're about $10 million in as of now, or projected to be a little bit less. And I guess the question, my first question is, how much less of the money that was budgeted this year are we not spending? Because that was not detailed.
Yeah, I can't give you an exact number right now, but it will probably be something in the 1.5 million range.
So somewhere close to $1.5 million.
At least, yeah.
Got you. Thank you.
But there's also a cost of not doing anything, because when we were keeping the lights on, patching up the old system,
Right.
we were spending a little bit north of $3 million every year just to keep Lawson running, a lot of expensive consultants and upgrades and all the other things.
From what I hear from some of my colleagues, I think the posture is, even if we're spending a little bit more per year to keep the lights on with what we have, given where we will be, in a few years with pensions rolling off and TADs rolling off and all these other things, that it will put us in a better place to be able to handle this without having to offset with so many other things. I mean, we're getting emails from schools about different cuts and different things that are happening. I'm really struggling with this. I digress.
So I'll address one thing on this slide, and Cynthia, I think this is to your point. So this slide does say fund balance, should say general fund. So our goal, as we've discussed in Budget Commission, is by FY27 to be fund balance neutral with our budget. So we are making expenditure reductions that would include and contemplate some rolling in of these costs by FY 2027. So then when it does roll off in FY 28, you see a savings to the expenditures by that amount. I would just say, Femi also mentioned some of those bolt-on systems that we have. So I'm paying $465,000 for a payroll system. in excess to Lawson. We have bonfire systems for our procurement team that is outside of Lawson. We have a travel system that is outside of Lawson. So our current systems, and that's just my departments, right? So we have all of these technologies that are spread across our district that the full cost of the implementation isn't being captured. And so the full savings we won't realize until the other side of this also. And so I don't think that those are as a piece of this presentation. I just want to add that context.
May I follow up on that? Okay. So just to make sure I understand, down at the bottom, the orange horizontal bar should read not fund balance, but general
It's
fund.
general fund, that's correct.
Okay,
right.
so we will not be expecting to take those funds out of our fund balance, which is our reserve account.
So this year for FY '25, we have a fund balance usage of 74 million. And we have earmarked one-time or short-term expenditures against that 74 million, and the ERP is a part of that. So for FY '26, we will likely use fund balance again. We're not there yet. We haven't started the conversation to balance the budget, but the budget parameters have outlined that we can use fund balance up to a point where we're at 12.5% of expenditures. So that's about 20 million of fund balance we could use for FY '26 that we don't necessarily have to use. Our conversations around closing the budget gaps will determine how much we use. But either way, it will be booked to the general fund. And that might be a part of just the overall expenditure budget for general fund if we don't use fund balance. If we do use fund balance, we would book this to fund balance, but it's still just being paid for out of the general fund.
Okay, so it doesn't mean the money won't come out of the fund balance because we will need $12 million in FY '26.
That's
and that's got to
correct.
come from somewhere. And so it may come from what we take out of
It
what
might
I
be some
think
of
of
the
as our
savings.
savings account.
That's correct.
Or it may come out of money that's already in the general fund, but, I mean, it's got to come from somewhere.
That's correct.
Okay, all right.
Loretta?
Thank you. So I just want to clarify that the cost of keeping the lights on is not the complete cost because it doesn't include all those extra things that were mentioned, but at minimum, $3 million a year. So if we push this off 3 years, that's $9 million that we basically would be spending on an old system that we would not be, it's not an investment. It would be basically, we would be burning through that, correct?
Correct. The 3 million is just in continuous development and contractor cost.
And these dollars that we're seeing are investments in a new system, correct?
These are direct investments.
Okay, so the other thing that we haven't talked about in terms of the cost of not doing this is the risks that have been identified from the different audits that have led us to do this. Can you talk a little bit about the risks that we'd be exposed to if we decided to push this off?
So there are some of the regulatory and compliance type of risk, but in addition to that, there's something as simple as a segregation of duties, for example, that we're not able to run a report that shows who has access to, who can submit create a new vendor and approve a check, or I'm sorry, an approved vendor in the system. Those roles should be separate. So we have to do, all of that manually today as part of the process. But that's just one of many examples around it.
Okay, so it sounds like another thing that I uncovered there, or you uncovered, is the efficiencies in just work.
Yes.
And the amount of time that it takes
Productivity
to do
for
things.
mostly our finance and HR teams. There's a lot of manual work that's been done by HR, finance, just in trying to maintain or do their day-to-day work, which will go away with the new system.
And has that been quantified, and is that included in the $3 million, or is that something
No, that's
additional?
not quantified in the $3
Okay.
million. We're actually working on a separate document to, over the next several months as we come before this board, you'll see us kind of articulate more the hard benefits, the dollars which we intend to recoup, as some of the softer benefits like efficiency and some of those other things out of this implementation. But that's something we already started working.
Thank you.
Thank you for this information. And having worked in technology for a very long time, I can appreciate that implementations don't always go perfectly. And so I would suggest even a more frequent cadence than every 4 months with an update, just so we are all aligned, just because of the investment and the cost of not doing business. And we understand like the critical nature of getting the system in place and up and functioning. And then the only other piece, and I'm sure it's being addressed, is just we want to make sure that there's enablement, right? Often we invest in a new system and then we don't enable our users on how to use it. We assume that adults love change and that they'll be very excited to try something new. And while that often works somewhere, I just want to make sure that we are investing the time to teach people how to use a system, because it's worth $0 if no one's using it.
Yeah, so we've spent a ton of time, in fact, from the very first day, on organizational change management. We've been partnering with the system integrator as well as our internal teams on developing a roadmap for how we train teachers and bus drivers, nutrition workers, and all the different adults within Atlanta Public School system on the new platform and everything. We have a lot of enthusiasm around this project. We actually ran out of licenses, and we're having to consider now, these are the Oracle licenses. We're now having to acquire more licenses to make sure that all of our business teams have enough licenses for all of the experts. So I'm encouraged in that, and we are doing exactly what you said, and we will continue to.
Thank you. That's great. I think that's it for questions. All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe we have an update on school nutrition, which was about a $15.4 million set-aside investment for FY25.
Good afternoon, members of the board, Superintendent Johnson, and everyone in attendance. My name is Eric Bankhead. I'm the Senior Executive Director of Nutrition Services for Atlanta Public Schools. Thank you for this opportunity to present to you today. In the journey to becoming a self-operating nutrition program, the board embraced 5 core tenets that defined our journey. And those are on the screen for you, and it basically evolved around more students eating, better quality of food, and for people. In addition, when we're talking about meal participation, so overall breakfast participation is slightly down 1%, and that's due to changes in enrollment, but we are feeding about 396 more meals per day. Overall lunch participation is up about 3%. That 3% is representing we're feeding about a little over 2,100 more students per day. When we discuss people, we give a quick update on our HR update. We have 29 employees currently enrolled in a GED program to work on getting their GED with the adult partnership with Adult Ed. 18 current employees enrolled in our newly developed MIT program, and this is to help develop our future leaders in our nutrition program. And we are also proud to announce that we have 14 dedicated food assistants that were promoted to lead food assistants. Talking about stakeholder engagement, right here on the slide, we had an event at TAG where we were out there in a family engagement event. During that time, we brought out samples of new menu items that we wanted to present in our menu starting in the January timeframe. And so we were able to get feedback from those community members that involved some students, parents, stakeholders, and some administration. And we used our data collection system that we have in every school. And so one thing I want to draw a point to is slide 3. So when you look at slide 3, there were mixed reviews, and that was our, I believe, our apple pie oatmeal. And within those reviews, you know, we didn't just go out there and say, hey, this is what we're putting on your menus. We took that feedback along with some student feedback, and that decision was made not to put that on our menus. And so with those decisions, you know, with these surveys, that's what's helping us drive our menus and how we're constantly trying to look forward to how we can serve our students. Here we just kind of wanted to show some stakeholder testimonies. Some of these testimonies are from principals and parents. We also have a picture here of a True Crew event that was at Garden Hills Elementary. And when I speak about our True Crew event, that's kind of our platform where we survey students, we get feedback from students, they do taste testings. Our last True Crew event we had was December 10th at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. We had over 9 schools represented, over 100 students participated in that. And just like with TAG, some of those same events, food items that we had at TAG, they surveyed at the Mercedes-Benz event as well. And once we collected all that data, we sent it back to the principals and let them know what the students said, what items would make the menus and what items would not make the menus based on that student feedback. And just to take a few minutes to share some highlights of the nutrition department and what we've done for the first part of the year. You know, you'll see some more True Crews on here. We had a True Crew at Virginia Highlands. We had the family engagement at TAG. We had a Miles coat giveaway that we did in partnership with the school, and it was just the nutrition department working with Miles to give some kids some coats. We have the APS Service First Award winner, Miss Monique Ivy from Scott Elementary. So just some things that we're doing in the program outside of just doing breakfast and lunch every day for our students. And just where are we going? So in the program, we've had, you know, again, this was a major lift. We've had some successes, we've had some challenges, and one of those is, like I said, just changing regulations. With the nutrition department, every year there's something changing, whether it's looking at the fat that's in the menus, the sodiums that's in the menus, and so we're just ever trying to evolve on how do we continue to make the menus flavorful for our students. Rising costs, we all are kind of feeling that today as we're out there in the grocery stores, and so we're feeling that same effect in the nutrition program, and staffing and retention. Some of the opportunities that we have, like as we talked about earlier with participation, breakfast is a huge opportunity for us. We can continue to drive our lunch participation as well. Emergency feeding on weather days are some of the things that we're trying to figure out. How can we feed students on those days that they're not in school and we're impacted by weather? And just more staff development and changing stakeholder perceptions. For 20 years, we were contracted. Now we're in service. So, you know, it's just the students that we lost, how do we get them back into the program? And I'll take questions.
Yeah, I'll ask my question real quick. When you talk about trying to increase participation, breakfast in classrooms, also lunch, what challenges are you having that creating that barrier, not, you know, creating a barrier for you with the low participation? Well, I'm not saying low participation, but what well, what challenges are you facing? Could you kind of explain what is taking place in a manner where you're not getting the participation you would like to see?
Yeah, good question. So I think it's new, right? And we're just trying to find out what's working for buildings, for schools. Some of it is just aligning with the schedules. They got a short time period to get in and get out. And when you look at breakfast, a lot of parents feed their kids breakfast, right? And so that's that get them out the door. And it's just those kind of challenges that we are working out. But we do have a huge opportunity when I think about some of the kids that's not. And in those schools, I will say we probably out 10 or 15 schools, we have 75, 80% participation. But it's those other ones that's in there that we're still looking to work out, and how can we work those?
And the follow-up to that, do you have, I don't know if it's an appendix, but could show us like a map of what that identify the schools that are having challenges with participation, whether it's breakfast or lunch, cluster by cluster, and those schools, so we could kind of see from a bigger lens, you know, where those opportunities are?
Yes, I don't have that, but I can provide that.
Okay. And then the other question I had, I know we're working on breakfast and lunch, but is there opportunity for supper for after-school activities, kids that stay after school, or innovative around, I know some districts in Indiana, they package supper for kids to take home in a bag. So I just kind of want to see if we have any creative, innovative ways around what are you thinking about a potential supper offering, whether it's on-site or take home. I know that's a little bit forward thinking,
Right.
but just I'm thinking as, as what our students, a lot of our students, I'm not going to say, some, but a lot of our students live in certain areas where there's food deserts. I mean, that's a community issue. I know that, but the way is on the school because the school is the heart of the community, and I totally understand that. But what ways can we help support those families? And just want to hear your thoughts around that.
So, Dawn, good question. So that is, like I said, we have looked at it. We are looking at next year, what can we do? And it's making it easier in that partnership with schools. Sometimes when you look at a supper program, there's so many requirements that a school has to do to get that program. And so how can we work together to do that? We've been talking to athletic directors and just trying to say, hey, if you have a program after school where kids are there, how can we open that program because they can eat? And so we've been having those conversations, and so we will get there, but it is thinking about how to streamline that to make it easier for the administrations as well, because it does come with a component of some after-school type program.
So I do love seeing the good news and seeing that stakeholder feedback because I've been in the district for a long time, and I feel like nutrition was an area of enrichment for us, as I like to say it nicely. One thing that I want to add to that testimonial is you all brought in Smart Mouth Pizza to North Atlanta High School, and I believe it's also at South Atlanta. It's kind of like a pilot program.
Right.
I've never heard about school food as much as I hear from these children about this pizza. In fact, I was there for a meeting and talked our cluster superintendent, Mr. Douglas, into let's mosey on down to the lunchroom so I too might enjoy some Smart Mouth Pizza, only to be told by these nice ladies like you're too late because it sells out every single day. So I know you're looking at expanding that program, but that is the type of innovative thinking, that is the type of kind of a creative approach. I do know that my own child, who also takes a lunch to school, is also enjoying the Smart Mouth Pizza. So we're just doubling down on lunchtime, but that has not been the case in the past. So I do just across the board, whether it's Spark, I saw that note from Morningside. I mean, this is what we should be doing, is just thinking of better ways to get these kids engaged in the lunchroom, for sure. So thank you for that, and I look forward to seeing where else you can expand that, even more broadly across the district.
I appreciate it, and it's been a good partnership. We're also looking at their stuff, which is more like a calzone type program, and we're also testing scratch-made pieces as well. So we are definitely trying to continue to move the needle forward.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bankhead. This was a big effort, and so it's nice to see it's got its legs underneath it. And as we visit schools, everyone is excited about the quality of the food. It's undeniably better. I view this as an instructional strategy, and so we're spending $15 million. Help me understand, when participation increases, that improves our economics, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if we want to, when we started this, we thought participation was going to improve a lot because that's what makes the value. What are we going? Breakfast actually receding was disappointing as a rate. Less percent of kids eating breakfast this year than last year was a little surprising, and lunch almost flat. What's the plan? What are we going to do differently next year?
And as a percentage of enrollment, because enrollment increased, it does look a little flat. But when you look at the average daily, we are feeding 400 more kids and 2,100 more breakfasts. But we're not satisfied with that number, so we absolutely need to do better. And so there are some programs that we've kicked around there around breakfast in the classroom, grab and go type things. And so we have a whole team, a whole plan. Some of our True Crew events, those are some of the breakfast items that we've been testing, breakfast bowls, different things, to kind of continue to move forward to see how can we continue to grow that participation within that. And then as well as lunch, same thing, new items, new way to do things we talked about bringing in Smart Mouth, doing scratch-made pieces, trying to get back to things that kids want to see. And so that's how we're going to grow it. And it is about also kind of getting the faith back in the program. I learned in my earlier time that when you lose a parent, it's difficult to get them back. And so that's what we're doing with some of this outreach, being at TAG, being at Mercedes-Benz, is being visible and letting parents have some faith in what we're doing.
Well, I lift up what Board Chair Mitchell talked about by looking at it by region, because I do view this as an instructional strategy. When kids are fed, kids perform better.
Absolutely.
And so next time when you bring these numbers to us, please have that in mind, because I'd love to see the participation. And we're looking at the rate of participation, so let's make sure we stay focused on the target here, but what's happening at schools where they could really benefit from this investment? And so again, food looks great. I appreciate you standing this up. It's an instructional strategy, and so what can we do to get the most value out of it?
Understood.
Thank you.
Board Member Pace.
Thank you. Just 3 quick questions. I think they'll be quick. One, for like the breakfast in the classroom option, some of those, and I apologize, kind of still on a learning journey of sorts, but for opportunities where, let's say, transportation may be a little delayed in terms of getting to school across grade levels, are students still having the opportunity to kind of maybe in a grab-and-go fashion get breakfast and then head to the classroom, or kind of how does that play out?
Yeah, they still have an opportunity. So if it comes down, a principal administrator called down, hey, got a few kids that came, we definitely provide those meals. And so, yes, that opportunity is there.
Perfect. Thank you. Second question, are we still providing kind of, either meals or healthy snacks for our student athletes kind of, during evening practices?
On some occasions, and I spoke to that a little earlier, we are continuing trying to drive that where we talked about the supper program. So with the supper program, it gives them a little more heartier, something a little more heavy for them. So we are working on that as well.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And then last question, we know there are kind of regulations and laws regarding the I guess, kind of tossing out of food, if you will, right, after a certain period of time, or if it's not served. Any kind of thoughts or innovations around how we might be, I guess, not as wasteful, right, in knowing we have to discard certain things, but other ways that we might be able to either repurpose or reimagine how that food gets used before it's considered to be tossed?
Yeah, so we are a little hesitant with some of that just because, we do own the liability of that. But there are some ways that we are looking at things where, we're looking at the dates on things, and let's just say, hey, we might have over-ordered something, let's just say. We are making sure that we're looking at those dates, and before it does expire, maybe working with our local food banks and handling that in a secure method to transfer that food before it just becomes waste. But as far as the schools, we're just constantly trying to train them on looking at your production and making sure that, if you have 500, 200 kids took it this time, change that and let's slowly get that number in line. So as you know, being new, some newer things, we've had some hit or misses, but the team is getting much better with that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Are there any additional questions? Board Member Brooks.
Thank you. What are we seeing as being a common thread for our schools that have higher participation as opposed to our schools that have lower participation?
A lot of it is sometimes just region. Some of it is just that, we have to do some, like we go in and we look to just make sure that, for one, we're producing the food the right way. So some of it is operational. And then some of it, again, is back to building that faith in the program. Again, they might have had some bad experiences and trying to get them to believe in the program again. And the task is just getting them through the line. Once I brought a sack lunch, it's getting them to see that the food looks good, tastes good, and coming back through the line. And so there's just different things, just like you said, showing you probably by region will probably answer that a little better. And so, like I said, I will provide that in input notes to that as well.
My third grader at Benteen would be upset with me if I did not ask this question. Oh, you already know, Dr. Johnson, it's coming. Christian wants to know if we are looking at the lunch times and whether or not there could perhaps be too large of a gap between the start of the day, especially for elementary, for the start of the day and the time that some students are eating lunch. That has been Christian's ongoing beef with Dr. Johnson for months now. We're definitely just trying to see if there's some thought around that at all, like just the pacing of lunch periods and that kind of thing.
We've had some just looking at it from initial conversation. Again, we came in, probably didn't look at it as much, but we've started some of those conversations on lunch periods and how many a school have. But again, that's working with the administration just to make sure, for one, we understand that education is first, and so how can we partner with that to make that work? But we have had some of those conversations.
I want to just echo the sentiments that Chair Mitchell brought up around the supper programs. Currently, I'm trying to raise money for the track team at my own school because coaches are paying out of pocket. Coach just sent me a $200 bill for food for kids for today. And it's a big issue, and I think with us, I mean, if we're being honest about it, we got a little bit of under-participation going on. I would really love to see us be intentional about, like, especially our athletes and kids in after-school programs, feeding them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bankhead. And I might take you up on some of that apple pie oatmeal. Gets voted, it's gone? Okay. All right. All right. So I'll frame the front of this. This titling of this is probably a little bit misleading in that it's not a comprehensive master plan. It gets probably a early introduction to master planning in Lakewood. So want to set that as a preface, as I know there's great energy and questions.
All right, good afternoon, board. I'm Dan Drake with Facilities here, presenting the Facilities Master Plan as well as the Lakewood Heights property, which is on tonight's was one of tonight's action items. So with the Facilities Master Plan, let's start with the current state. As you can see here, we have a chart of all 73 of our school facilities. We would like our school facilities to stay in that green and blue, those 9 and 14, those 23 schools, where you're in that sweet spot of 65 to 95%. Unfortunately, we have 42 of our facilities that are less than 65% utilization over the next 2 or 3 years. And we also have other schools that are low enrollment, which are less than 400 students. At elementary, 600, less than 600 at middle school, and less than 800 at high school. Combined, you have 51 campuses that are either underutilized, low enrolled, or dual campuses, which equates to about 22,000 empty seats throughout the district. On the other hand, we have 6 overutilized middle and high school cluster or facilities at 3 clusters of Midtown, Jackson, and North Atlanta. You can see those are the red, the 3 red, and the 5 yellow. So we've got to be looking at the facilities master planning process that we're about to talk about here tonight is to talk through how we look at both of those opportunities on both the overutilization side as well as the underutilization side. So the approach and focus is why are we doing this facilities master plan or FMP 2026? All of our facilities must enable robust, comprehensive, engaging, effective student learning. When it comes, again, it always comes back to student learning. And this facilities master plan isn't just about fixing problems today, it's looking to the future for making our schools and community better. So while from the facilities perspective, still must address our overcrowded facilities and our underutilized facilities, all of these decisions will be driven by a school-focused programmatic offering vision. So this is more than just a facilities plan. The effective date for any of the decisions that we're looking for could be as early as August of 2026. And I'll show you in the time frame in the next couple slides what that looks like. But not all of our changes would be effective of August 26, as many changes will be phased out over many years. But while these could be phased out over many years, we do need the decision within the next 12 months. This process and these decisions will support the major decisions ahead with the SPLOST vote. So how are we going to do this facilities master plan? Our decisions that we are looking for will be driven by the needs of students versus looking at operational budgetary concerns. And we must engage to set a clear vision for what every high-quality elementary, middle, and high school and APS must offer our students. And this will be aligned with the strategic planning update process that's happening this year. So the strategic planning process will drive what's going on at the facilities master plan. I'm going to pause for a moment on the facilities master plan to talk about the other item, which is the Lakewood Heights property. So the first, just as a reminder, in September of 2024, the Board of Education approved 3 intergovernmental agreements. One was a framework IGA that looked at 8 properties, looking at reactivating our vacant properties for affordable housing, historic preservation for any buildings where it's applicable, and maintaining a 50-year ground lease for how we were able to offer that affordable housing. At the same meeting in September 24, the Lakewood Heights IGA and the People Street project-specific IGA were approved. This month, the Lakewood Heights IGA is coming to the board for approval. Next month, the People Street IGA will be coming to the board. And a reminder just shows you the other 6 future approvals, which we do not have any project-specific IGAs at this point. As a reminder, the Lakewood Heights Elementary School has been closed since 2004. It is 3 buildings near the intersection of Sawtell and Jonesboro Road. It is in the South Atlanta cluster, but right across the street, Sawtell is the Carver cluster. The 3 buildings there are built in 1930s, 1950s, and 1990s, and it's the 1930s building is that we'll be looking for historic preservation. So we have engaged, or AUDC, the Atlanta Urban Development Corporation, has engaged the community at multiple meetings. And what did we hear? As you can see, what we've heard is people love to see families or individuals in space, and how that relates to the right sides is affordable mixed income. And so what you'll be seeing at tonight's board meeting is the addendum 2, which talks about 30 to 60 residential units on that property, which 30% of it, or 9 to 18 of those units, will be affordable. And the next item that we heard was local restaurants, potentially small market. And what you'll also be seeing tonight is neighborhood scale food and beverage options, which is a range of 2,000 to 15,000 square feet of commercial that could be done in the existing historic building, or even some new buildings that would be built. One of the things was that a historic marker would be nice. Community knows the historic relevance of the school. It's the historic nature and the historic significance has not gone unnoticed by the community. So one of the key requirements is to preserve the 1930s building, and where it makes sense, to preserve the 50s and the 90s building. So to let you know where we are, again, in January 23, the APS board declared the property surplus. Again, in September, the IGA. We have finished the phase 3, which is the green area, and we are now going from the green into blue, from phase 3 to phase 4. Tonight's approval would allow us to move forward to phase 4, where we would work with the AUDC would work with the Neighborhood Association, Lakewood Heights Neighborhood Association, and MPUI, to build consensus for the rezoning and the entitlements for that, which would get us to June or July. And then the next phase after that would be the developer selection through the AUD process. Switching back to the facilities master plan, where are we going with the facilities master plan? So in the past 3 months and the next month and a half, we have been working on and will continue working on program visioning in the months of January to April, program visioning and preliminary operational planning, which looks at how we're reviewing our forecasting capacity. We're procuring a consultant to get under contract to help us assist with this holistic plan, and to begin the program visioning with the various other departments within APS. Our goal is to establish a facilities master plan task force that's representative of community stakeholders throughout the district next month in April. And then really in the months of April of 25 to October of 2025 is the major stakeholder education and community engagement process, where we look to inform and engage the community for this FMP process, looking at both the educational program framework, some of the options of consolidations, rezoning additions, et cetera, and then any final recommendations. As a reminder again, these decisions for consolidation, rezoning, and additions will be phased over many years. But again, these decisions are needed within about a year from now in early 2026. The goal is that after the engagement in October, we bring it to first and second read to the board in November and December of this year. And then at that point, we will have that approved, and then we can shift for January 26th to June of 26 to focus on the SPLOST list that would need to be approved by the board in June of 26 ahead of the November 2026 referendum for the SPLOST 2027, which will start in July of 2027. So as we've talked about, we have had team meetings with leaders of the schools department, academics, student supports, and all of our cluster superintendents to provide them an overview of the approach and focus of the FMP to get them ready for their program visioning work. And we have forthcoming consulting to get our consultant under contract to guide us through this holistic process. And finally, we're finalizing our FCA scores, our facility condition assessment scores for all facilities. And our goal is to bring back detailed next steps and timeframes at the May board meeting in the similar information session. We'll open up for any questions for the board on either Lakewood Heights or the FMP 2026.
Can I ask Dr. Bradshaw to just come up and give a little bit of color around the process, what you anticipate as we get ready to roll, because it's going to be a little part of your work, right, G?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. We're looking forward to this process. We're taking a different approach this time, as opposed to just looking at school closures. We're looking at a facilities master plan. We take a look at deferred maintenance, small schools, underutilized schools, overpopulated schools, and the goal is to get the community's input. So we're going to have each cluster have stakeholders that are present at each of the meetings so that we can get everyone's point of view before any final decisions are made.
I'll start taking questions. I know Jessica Johnson has a question, and my panel of people over here, and I'll come back. I'll be back and forth. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. We got a lot of work ahead of us. So when I'll start with the stakeholders. I know in some communities, the prominent stakeholders, the NPU, and in the other communities, not so much. And so when you say that we're going to identify stakeholders, how are we approaching that work to make sure the true, authentic community voice is being lifted up?
Yes, ma'am. Hopefully we'll be able to work closely with the cluster superintendents and work closely with the GO teams and find out those stakeholders who have input, who can give us some valuable information before any final decision is made. So the GO teams will probably play an important role as well.
Thank you. And then what was the number again of affordable housing that was going to be available? Because you said it real fast. I didn't catch it. Sorry.
Sure. We have the range of, it's 30% of all the units, and we have 30 to 60 units, so it would be 9 to 18, which is 30% of that.
And I guess who's responsible for like accountability levers for developers to honor that commitment?
Sure, that is a shared responsibility between APS and the AUDC. We will have a ground lease. After this process tonight, they will go through their process with RFQ, and all of that will be, all of those enforcement mechanisms will be through our ground lease, and then there will be a sublease between AUDC and their selected developer.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Kinza, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Drake, and this is and Mr. Bradshaw, Dr. Bradshaw. This is an exciting opportunity here. I think this, we've been down this road. Our communities have been down this road many times. I do like the idea of a task force. Just building on Board Member Johnson's question. This task force, give us a sense of what we should expect of the board. Does the task force make a recommendation? Do they lay out a bunch of options? Do they vote on something and that comes here? Do they vote on 3 things? Can you give it, I know, Dr. Bradshaw, you said you'd been through something similar in previous districts. Can you tell us what we should expect over here?
Yes, sir. Hopefully the task force will receive all of the information that the senior cabinet receives. We want to be as transparent as possible. So hopefully if we get those community stakeholders involved, seeing what takes place from beginning to end and how we come up with the recommendations, you will have a menu of options to choose from over a period of time. But that's the goal of the task force, is to lay out the entire plan for transparency so they can go back out to the community and say that they do understand the process.
And then is the community interface through with the process through their task force representatives?
Yes, sir, that is correct. In addition to them being involved with the task force, we'll go out to the communities, to each cluster community, and share our findings and gather additional input, because we know that a task force member can only represent the information for basically their school that they support. But we want to get all the different options that are available in the community.
Well, I appreciate the diligence here, and I would just, we probably need to over communicate by half on this. I'm okay with people disagreeing with the outcome. I struggle when people disagree with the process. And so if we can just make sure that we're because this is new. I haven't seen this sort of construct before for this sort of process. At least here, I think it's ambitious. Like Board Member Johnson said, we got a lot of work ahead of us. But please, let's over communicate and put as much out there for folks so folks understand how this train's leaving the station.
Board Member Pace.
Thank you both so much for sharing. Confirming kind of two pieces of information. One related to affordability. You mentioned probably anywhere between 9 to maybe 18 units, give or take. Confirming the AMI band, area median income, is that 50% to 80% of AMI, or what's the kind of agreed upon affordability band?
Sure, yes, it is. 20% of the units would be at 50% AMI,
okay,
and 10% would be at 80% AMI. And to get you an understanding of what 50% looks like, depending if it's a one-person or two-person household, that's an income of $37,000 to $43,000. That's a 50% AMI, so it would be up to that amount. For an 80% AMI is a $60,000 to $68,000 income, and then the rents for the 50% would be $1,000 to $1,200, and $1,600 to $1,900 for the 80%. Just to give you a ballpark of what we're looking at.
Excellent, thank you. And then just quick follow-up to that, and I know this is a little tricky with housing regulations and so forth, but in our kind of negotiation of the ground lease piece, was there any conversation around, again, careful with my wording, but I'm just gonna say designation of maybe 1 or 2 or 3 units for APS staff or teachers, maybe from a cluster in the Lakewood neighborhood, or anything kind of in that realm, such that, again, I love the idea of this intentional affordable housing piece. I think it's great use of our facility, but would love to see it kind of a step further to even be more intentional with housing our own staff, who we know many of them live outside of the city and can't necessarily afford to live in. So would love to see some, just additional forward movement on that.
Yeah, there's 2 elements that we believe are APS specific that we have talked with AUDC and will be part of our final negotiations as we get to the ground lease for both of these projects. One is, as you mentioned, the possibility of having employee-based preference and all of those, and there's some legal things that we can go, that we still need to iron out with that. That's for both teachers and non-teaching staff.
Absolutely.
And then the other piece would be, we're looking at trying to get more 2 or 3 bedroom apart units because of our families. Part of it's for our families. We don't see families in anything less than 2 or 3 bedroom units. So we're looking at both of those perspectives as we finalize our negotiation.
Excellent.
And those ranges, the low range and high range, depends on how many 2 or 3 bedroom units that we have.
Absolutely, thank you.
So going back to this concept of this task force, which I like this concept a great deal, I do want to just reemphasize that when we ask for community engagement, we need to just be very careful in protecting the interest of the community members to participate. And the minute they don't trust a process, then we have lost them. So just wanting to dive in a little bit deeper on how are we identifying who we are adding to that task force, what is that process? And it doesn't have to be, we could do a balcony view of it for now, but that tied to the communication piece, I mean, in the past, sometimes we ask people for input and then we disregard their input, so then it makes them lose faith in us as, parents that are very invested. So the process is going to be very critical that it's just very crisp and clean. So just give us a little bit of talk track on that.
Yes, ma'am. The primary purpose for putting together a task force is to share transparency, is to educate the community. I've shared some data with the senior team so far, and right after the meeting, they totally got it. They totally understood the concept, and actually they were ready to move forward. So we want to replicate that process to ensure that everyone sees the same information, they see the same data, understand the data source that we're using before we make decisions, and try to ensure that one decision can spill over to another community. So you need to look at forecasting. All of that is going to be brought into consideration before any recommendations are brought to the Board of Education.
Right. How are we identifying who we want to participate? How is that being communicated to them? Is that still to be?
So I think there's some that's to be determined. I think what I hear is there's a little bit of desire amongst the board to make sure that there's some representative sampling from your communities. And we're going to work with you side by side with that, and we'll be looking forward to you for some recommendations as we work to go forward. The one thing I do want to say, I'm always this person that's really, really clear because it's kind. At the end of this, during this, there will be people that feel like the process wasn't clear. There will be people that don't agree with the process, no matter how crisp, how clean, how solid we are. Because this is, as McRae-Bounds leadership talks about, this is a second-order change. This is a break from everything that is norm. And no matter what you do, the research shows that culture, order, input, and communication, called the unholy four, are always deemed as negatives when you go through second-order change. And so when you talk about changing footprint, you're pivoting culture. Right, people feel like you're not communicating enough. People feel like it's not orderly enough, and people feel like you don't get enough input. And so, knowing that going in, it makes it important for us. I think, as you mentioned, Vice Chair, to do all we can, right, to over communicate, to get as much input as possible, to make this as orderly as possible, right, and to be as mindful of the culture as we possibly can, while still understanding that it's going to be perceived as chaotic, lack of communication, lack of input, because we are, this is shifting people's foundation. And these are difficult conversations. And so I just want to name that and claim that early, because we'll get in this process and somebody will say, well, I didn't know anything about. And in reality, it's probably true, you know what I mean? But it's not because of a lack of effort, right? So I think it's really important. And I'm going to talk that plainly with the community. Like, behind this, and I think there's something else to speak to, and Dr. Bradshaw kind of spoke to this, but it's not just about closing schools. It's about providing a better experience, because we have situations in our district where we can't fully staff and offer robust programming, because frankly we're spreading ourselves very, 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 very thin. And so it's an important conversation to have. There are layers within this that I think is important to note, in communication with principals and really working through that. I mean, there's a lot of steps in the change management piece to do this really well. But I won't lie and say I'm excited to begin these conversations, because that'd be flat out lying. These are just necessary conversations. So I'm not necessarily excited about them at all.
So I'm gonna give a little bit of order real quick. We have Cynthia, we have Katie, Jessica, Aretta, and Chivy. Yeah.
We're going to play tennis up here. I want to go back to the process for Lakewood. I think that's, well, these aren't numbered, so it's the one with that one. Oh, that one right there. if I understand you correctly, we are moving from the green into the blue. Can you talk a little bit about building community consensus during this phase 4? How do we expect that to happen? Who will be involved in that? Again, kind of some of the same questions we've just asked about the FMP process. How do we make sure that all voices are heard and honored? And I say this because, as we know, this project has been contentious in the neighborhood.
Sure. Yeah, well, so we've had 3 public meetings, and the Lakewood Heights Community Association, which is the neighborhood organization, and NPUY have been intimately involved. The adjacent landowners, everybody's been involved. The process so far, where this one has gone very well attended. Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, again, I'm talking about Lakewood Heights. I'm not talking about the People Street ones. I'm being real clear on this one. So it's gone very well. It's very well attended. So this would be, so we've had our 3 meetings with them. This would be the continuation to phase 2 with those same ones. So they know the AUDC folks. They know the consultants that have been working with them. And it would just be continuing from now that we have the master plan to getting to the rezoning and entitlements piece.
I'll say the same thing that Superintendent Johnson just said about the facilities master planning process. No matter what ends up being recommended or ends up being procured or built, some people are going to be very upset out there. And we need to make sure that while we know we can't satisfy everyone, we want everyone to know that they were heard and genuinely respected in this process.
Board Member Howard?
Real quickly, I can vouch for what you just shared. I went to one of the last Lakewood Heights meetings, and I'll just say awesome how far we've come in this process.
Yeah.
There have been moments, but I was impressed by the team that was leading it. And all the credit goes to the community for working together to come up with what they've come up with. And I'm proud of this board for focusing on affordable housing. I'm with you, Board Member Pace. We all brought up the need for making sure we provide a way for our educators, our staff, to be a part of this. So appreciate you sharing the level of detail you shared there. Going back to facilities master planning, I look at this like slide 57 with the why, when, what, how. Appreciate those being called out and what has been highlighted around the need for programmatic visioning and that focus in this plan. I think of the board's role in this process that we've been working on right now and resetting our goals and our guardrails in the start of the strategic planning process, and how we have to do a really good job of communicating that out to the community. So when we get farther along and we really work hard to have that alignment, especially with the budget, and what our highest needs are and how we're really honing in on those. That will be huge in this process. So, as we're moving through this work, how we can talk even more about that, we have a work session to schedule as a board that we'll be doing the goal resetting work with the superintendent and team. And just going back to the engagement part, I appreciate Dr. Johnson and you all lifting that you'll be working closely with us so we make sure we communicate in a variety of ways. But really, I don't have a question at this point. My colleagues have asked all of them, but just again, the focus for the board and our role in all this is our highest need areas and how we're going to make sure our students have the highest quality instruction and the most robust programmatic experience, which definitely relates back to our facilities. One thing that when we do come together and we get some more information, just seeing our overall footprint in that data, what is empty completely. And I would like to know, as we finish up with Lakewood Heights, what cost savings is that to us, not having to maintain a building that's been deteriorating too. So thank you all.
Board Member Johnson?
Thank you.
And then Board Member Brooke.
So Katie, that was a perfect tee up. I think I am most kind of excited that the strategic plan is going to guide this process. I would go out on a limb and say literacy is still going to be a primary focus in some capacity with our strategic plan. And so one of the questions I had asked during our meeting with AUDC is around like how as we are supporting the city's affordability goals, how can this AUDC also support our literacy goals? And just since we're in this negotiation space, just wanted to put it on the table that I think there are opportunities as the city has made investments in after-school programming to figure out how they can align and augment and elevate the literacy work that we're trying to do in these specific communities.
Board Member Brooks.
Thank you. Couple quick things. I just really wanted to encourage us to be aggressive about pushing on the 3-bedroom unit piece. I live in the area by Lakewood Elementary, and we don't have many rental opportunities. There are actually no rental opportunities for 3 bedrooms, and I think, as we all know, those are the units that are likely going to yield us children who would attend our schools. So I would encourage us to look at creating those opportunities. You stole my thunder on the incentives for educators and city employees and our properties. I encourage that to just kind of be the energy for everything that we do as we're building out. As far as I'm concerned, if we focused on that, I would be happy. And lastly, this is maybe a little bit off topic, and I know, Dr. Johnson, we talked about it briefly, but the old police training facility that they have now vacated because they now have the new training facility, that one. So are we making sure that we're maintaining that property? I've been getting phone calls from folks in the community about storage boxes in the back that have been broken into, all different types of things, the grass not being cut. Just wanted to streamline a little bit, like when we have these handoffs from the city, making sure like we're not allowing properties to go dilapidated or looking crazy, and it's our responsibility to be taken care of.
And to address the former training center, which is the former Harper Elementary facility, we did get some complaints in the last week and a half, and we've addressed all of that, grass cut, all of that. So it has been resolved.
Thank you. I got to go back over that way. You know,
Not developed.
No, but it cleaned up,
Addressed.
grass cut,
Cleaned up.
grass
Yes.
cut.
Not
Yeah,
Right.
not developed.
All right, Already Baldwin.
Thank you so much for taking the time to give us a little bit more information on the Lakewood property. It was nice to see that walked through, as our experience has not been the same with the People Street, but I can attest to the fact that the folks that are running this have done an amazing job listening and bringing back a next iteration of a presentation and idea to the community, and so the community involvement has been quite refreshing. Now, I do also have some excitement and curiosity around the task force. And my question in that space is, I know we do a really, really good job communicating to our staff and our parents, but we also have a lot of very engaged community members and organizations that touch our schools that may want to participate in these conversations. So I just want to make sure that when we cast a net, that we cast a net to include them as well. And the last thing I want to thank you for is that while going through this process, you're not looking at our students as numbers, and you're taking a program approach and looking at what is that experience, and that alone is new, and I appreciate you for that, and I'm excited about where we're going to go. I know it's going to be some difficult conversations, but where we end up is going to be in a space that is better for our children and families. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much for your presentation and your time. Dr. Johnson, do we have one more presentation?
We do. So the last, we're done with this presentation. I think the last thing I'll mention is, as Lisa comes up, is all this should be connected. So, you know, the goals and guardrails and the strategic plan should all drive what we do from a funding standpoint. And so coincidentally, all this kind of braided. I know it was heavy, but necessary because these were big investments that the board made last year that you all deserved an update on. And so with that, we'll turn to Lisa.
Yeah, great, thank you. Good afternoon, Board Chair Mitchell, members of the board, Dr. Johnson. Today I'll present 4 topics related to finance. I'll provide you with the financials for FY25 for all activities occurring in the months of July through January. I'll discuss the need for some budget adjustments, and finally, I'll present an overview of the FY26 primer and provide an update on the FY26 budget development process so far. With the next 4 slides, we'll cover the FY25 financials for the first 7 months of the fiscal year. The financial position continues to be relatively strong. So far, we have collected about 83.49% of total revenue, with local collections at 93.71%, state at 45.56%, and other at 55.52%. We're currently tracking ahead of pace for revenue collections overall as compared to this point in time last year. Last year, by February, we had collected a total of 80.52% of total revenue. This year, we're already at 83.49%. On slide 5, we see the budget to actual expenditures so far. We've currently spent slightly more than half of the budget at 54.25%, and spending in all functions is appropriate for this time of the current fiscal year. And current spending trends for FY25 against 24 show that by the end of January in 24, we had spent 53.65% of our total budget. This year, we have spent 54.25%. We're closely monitoring spend and working to identify and mitigate areas of overspend. As discussed earlier in today, you can see we're tracking ahead of pace in instruction. That's due to the average teacher salaries I mentioned, but we're well behind pace at 50.86% compared to 56.8% last year in general administration spend. Slide 7 shows activity for select federal program budgets so far this year. FY24 carryover has been added to this budget. Carryover was intentional to support summer programs such as Power Up from Title I and separate district-funded summer programming from Title IV. Slide 8 shows a comparison to the previous fiscal year, and as a reminder, title funds have a 15-month period of availability, July 1st through September 30th, and when comparing the year-to-date actuals, FY25 is spending at a faster pace than FY24, with the exception of Title IV Part B, which is related to a reduction in 21st Century Learning Center programs. Today, I'm bringing 2 budget adjustments for the Consolidated General Fund. The first is to decrease both revenue and expenditures by $24,661 for the charter school facility grant based on the actual award from the state. And the second is to increase both revenue and expenditures by $403,358 for the charter school facility grant. That first one is CTAE. I misspoke. I'm sorry about that. Based on the actual award for the state. The second adjustment is an increase of $1.3 million for Title IV carryover. Details for these adjustments can be found in Agenda Item 6.1, and Agenda Item 9.3 includes the detailed information report for special revenue adjustments less than $1 million that have occurred in February. At this time, I'll provide a brief update on the FY26 budget development process and introduce the primer. A budget primer sets the stage and provides context to the public for the development assumptions and impacting factors for the budget process. This primer includes an overview of APS, including highlights of the year so far, discusses innovations in resource allocation, including our student success funding formula and the consolidation of funds, provides an overview of the budget process, including the budget development calendar and public engagement process. It grounds us in the FY25 current budget and provides an overview of the budget drivers, including the FY26 guiding principles and budget parameters, strategic priorities, and known costs, including the annual 3% increase to our city pension contribution and impacts of compensation models and state health rate changes. This year will also highlight the national, state, and local economic context. The budget primer can be found in Agenda Item 9.5, as well as on the APS budget website. The next 3 slides will provide an update on the FY26 budget development process so far. Slide 13 outlines the process we have undertaken to develop the most significant portion of our general fund budget, which is the school allotments. Schools received their FY26 allotments on January 15th. Principals presented their budget ideas to Go Teams in late January and early February and continued to work through their final budget proposals throughout this past week when academic and staffing conferences were held and budgets were locked. Slide 14 walks through the central office department budget request process. Department heads built their budget request within OpenGov and were instructed to include narrative, justification, and wherever possible, alignment to the district goals, guardrails, and strategic plan. They began this process January 9th, and budgets were locked February 28th. There have been many training and support sessions over the course of this time. Chiefs now have a week to review and improve their department budgets, requests, and then budget services will begin to process of combining or combing through those requests to identify redundancies and streamline. After both the school and department budgets are developed, we build the consolidated general fund budget request. Compare that to the proposed forecasted revenue and begin the inevitable gap closure conversations. We have 3 final budget commission meetings. On March 20th, we'll have our first glimpse at that final the 2026 comprehensive budget recommendation. In April, we'll review the non-general fund budget recommendations and discuss any final recommendations for the tentative budget adoption. And in May, we'll discuss any changes that may occur between the tentative and final adoption. That concludes my presentation. I'll take any questions you have.
Any questions? Oh, hearing none.
Right.
Thank you, Dr. Bracken. With that being said, I will now entertain a motion. Well, first of all, Madam General Counsel, see, I jumped the gun. Is there a reason for us to retreat into executive session?
Yes, Madam Chair, the board needs to discuss student discipline and legal matters.
Thank you. Now we'll entertain a motion to enter into executive discussion to discuss student matters, student discipline, and personnel.
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved by Board Member Briscoe Brown, second by Board Member Pace. All in favor?
Aye.
Say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.